Think about the stars for a minute. During the daylight hours, even on a cloudy day, you know that there's the sun out there, which is a star. And at nighttime, you can, at least if you're in a place with a decent view of the night sky, see stars all out speckling the sky. And sometimes you might recognize familiar ones in patterns that we call constellations, Orion or the Big Dipper or what have you. But it's weird to think, kind of humbling to think, that all the time, in addition to our local star, the sun, that we're familiar with, and in addition to the handful of constellations you might be able to pick out that you learned in elementary school science class, there are millions upon millions upon millions of stars further out, not just in our galaxy, but there are countless galaxies beyond that. We go about our ordinary lives, going to the grocery store and the post office and going to our jobs and taking kids to sports practice and band and all that, while meanwhile we are part of a huge swirling spiral of millions of stars with all sorts of cosmic oddities in there. There are supergiant stars that might explode in a supernova. There are neutron stars that are whirring and spinning and sending out radio signals with a regular rhythm. There are binary stars that orbit each other. There are white dwarfs that are like the ghosts left over when a medium-sized star finally puffs its last breath of fire into the universe. There are black holes, stars that have collapsed under their own weight and are now sucking in everything, including light. In other words, the universe is a weird place, even just thinking about the kinds of stars that are out there, and most of us go through our day-to-day life not giving one thought about them. We just take for granted the sun will be there and some familiar stars will be out when we're walking the dog at night. But every so often it's worth being reminded that we live in a universe that is surprising and weird and full of things that we aren't usually aware of, that our eyes can't recognize, sometimes that only give off frequencies of light that our eyes don't see. And that the world, the universe, is full of things like this, whether we are familiar with them or not. It's kind of a daunting, kind of a humbling reality. We like to imagine we're the center of attention, that we're the central characters in our own life stories, and then to be reminded that we are on this tiny blue planet that is going around a medium-sized star that is just sort of stuck in the middle of one arm of the galaxy. It reminds us our place in the cosmos is one among so many other wild and bizarre and strange things. My reason for starting with that suggestion is that this coming Sunday we're going to do something weird in worship, a good kind of weird. But this Sunday is the festival in the church's year marked out to remember and talk about Saint Michael and all angels. Michael is one of the few angels who's given a name in the scriptures. There's just a handful of times in the Bible where anyone called an angel is also given a name. And we're going to talk about why does it matter that there are these strange spiritual cosmic beings occasionally described in the Bible? And what should I think about them? How much should I think about them? Because after all, to be honest, most of the time we go through our day basically not thinking about that there could be angels all around us. We're going through our regular routines, right? The post office, the grocery store, kids to soccer practice, getting to our jobs and doing the laundry and going to bed. Most of the time we don't think about, oh my goodness, there are all sorts of other beings out there that I can't see. It's a kind of humbling reminder that we human beings are just one of God's creations. And at least to hear the scriptures tell it, there are other beings that can reason and think and that can worship and praise God, that are used as God's servants and messengers. Angels are like that. Sometimes in the Bible, appear, kind of like the stained glass windows we have here. Sometimes in the Bible, they're described as basically looking like people. They have to be identified as angels. Other times they're sort of wild and monstrous, cherubim with many flaming wings, or seraphim with 6 sets of wings and seeming to be blazing on fire. There's all sorts of other bizarre, surprising, startling beings that the Bible just goes, yeah, God's made a whole bunch of things. You humans are important, but you're not the only game in town. That's kind of humbling. Now, on the other hand, it can sound scary too, because once you start talking about angels, you start thinking about, are there other sorts of beings out there that I should be afraid of? Again, sometimes the Bible talks about unclean spirits or demons, and it can be real easy to get sucked into fear about all those invisible hidden things. And at that point, you wonder, why even bother talking about angels or demons or things like that? I'm just having a hard enough time getting through my day without thinking about invisible beings. These are all the kind of questions that we're going to have to take a look at this coming Sunday. And as we do it, we're going to be guided not just with a humbling realization that we aren't the only beings in the universe, that God has made angels and cherubim and seraphim, but at the heart of it all, even if it's humbling to realize we're not the only game in town, and there are angels, that the good news is that despite the fact that we are not alone, that there's all sorts of other beings out there that most of the time we can't see, God's already won the victory that matters, and that God has brought us into relationship with God's own being through Jesus. In the end, for all the times the Bible gives us glimpses of angels, they always really quickly point us back to God and to say, but you're brought into relationship with God. Don't settle for just getting excited about angels. Don't settle for thinking about how interesting it is that there's cherubim and seraphim and things out there, but you've been brought into relationship with God, whose love promises to hold you. Maybe a lot like the promise, the assurance we have day by day that the gravity of the sun will hold us in place in earth around its orbit in a safe place to live. That we're okay. We're going to be held, even though, yeah, it's a wild universe full of all sorts of strange and bizarre things. Maybe that's what we'll discover as we begin to talk about angels and why they show up in the Bible, what they are, whether we should be afraid or fearful or comforted or just mystified by them, but in the end to come back to the good news that all these amazing creations are of the God who's loved us, who also hasn't just sent angels to occasionally send us the occasional message or pamphlet, but who has come to us in Jesus. Maybe ever so often remembering that there are other beings out there like angels, and that God has chosen not to just send like the angelic vice president of human affairs, but has come to us in person, in the flesh, in Jesus, reminds us just how deeply we are beloved, even though we aren't the only beings that God has made. Those kind of questions are worth every so often setting aside your usual routines and talking about. So join us this coming Sunday. In particular this Sunday, join us because our own new seminary intern, Vicar Natalie, is going to be the one talking to us in worship preaching about St. Michael and the angels and why any of that is good news. Join us for all those conversations this coming Sunday. See you then.